Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please leave a rate and review. Today, we'll be heading over to the Sun Belt Conference to take a look at the Arkansas State Red Wolves, who finished 8-5 a year ago and capped off their season with a win in the 68 Ventures Bowl. They wrapped up their 2025 spring practice with their Pack Day spring game on April 26th. I guess I should say more of a practice is what it kind of turned into. We have a special guest joining us today. She does the Workday Redzone at the Ticket Radio. She does pregame and Wolf Howl on 107.9 KFIN on game days. She is a big fan of Pancho's cheese dip. She is Kara Richey. Kara can be found at Kara_Richey on X. Welcome to the show, Kara.
Thanks, guys. Great introduction. I appreciate the invite. Had a great opportunity to talk with you guys last year. Had a lot of fun talking about Arkansas State. So I really appreciate another invitation to do it again this year.
We're happy to have you. And for those who are just turning into the G5 Hive for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been covering Arkansas State football?
Sure. I've been covering A-State for a little bit over a decade. I'm not sure if we're at year 11 or year 12 now, to be perfectly honest with you. I think it's 12, but they're starting to run together for a little bit. And I worked at the Ticket since that time. I think I've hosted Wolf Howls now for 11 years, which is the post-game A-State football show. The Workday Redzone, I hosted that now for, I guess, about 8 years. And that is a midday talk show in Jonesboro that focuses heavily on Arkansas State athletics. So I've been around for a little bit at this point in time, and I think I'm fairly well-versed in what we're going to discuss today, but I printed out a lot of notes just in case, because these rosters are changing daily, but I think I'm ready to go.
Yeah, it's definitely a crazy time. Like you said, at least the portal's closed now. There's no, I mean, I guess graduates can still enter, but for the most part, there's no new entries. It's just new additions. So maybe we're getting to some sort of sanity here in the coming weeks. For those not familiar with the Arkansas State offensive style, how would you describe it?
I kind of think of it at this point as like the standard college football offense. And basically, I mean by that, it's a spread offense. They're going to operate 100% out of the gun. And that's what you're going to see. They want to be balanced as much as possible. Of course, Butch Jones will tell you that he wants to run first, but it is more of a balanced offense there. They're going to do Jalen Raynor's going to do some zone read stuff. They're going to have design plays for him as well as a dual threat quarterback, who we'll dive into more here in just a moment. But they're going to spread the field. They're going to go at more of a higher tempo. Certainly don't want to slow it down. They want to get that clock moving, get those chains moving as quickly as possible. And that's kind of about it. Again, I think that's an offense that you see really heavily around college football. There are definitely some teams that do some other things, and they'll throw some different wrinkles into it, but it's kind of a what you see is what you get type of offense. Not a lot of trickeration, not a lot of razzle dazzle. Just spread them out and hurry it up.
Well, let's get to the position where it all starts on offense, and that's the quarterback. Last season, the Red Wolves saw starter Jalen Rayner struggle at times while also displaying some wow-type moments. Rayner returns, but veteran backup Timmy McClain has moved on, and they bring in Ethan Crawford from Southern Miss. How did this quarterback room look to you in the spring?
I think it looked solid. There's certainly no doubt that Rayner is the established #1 guy there. I don't really feel like that was ever a debate coming into the spring, and it certainly was not a debate going out of the spring. He just looks very comfortable. He just looks very relaxed. There were some moments where we saw some good things with Crawford. There were some moments where we saw some good things with Flowers. There were some moments where it also looked like maybe there's not a lot of clarity there yet to see who is definitely going to 100% set in stone be the backup. I don't know if that was decided. Again, saw some good from both guys, but I don't necessarily remember seeing just a ton of oh my gosh, wow, this guy's gotta have an opportunity next season. Just solid play, but not necessarily anything that I made a lot of notes of or anything like that. I do think that might be kind of one of those battles that comes down to some of the intangibles, which it does a lot with quarterbacks, how these guys act in the locker room, how they act in the meeting room and things like that. And that's stuff that as a media member, I'm not in those rooms. I don't know the answers to that. But I think it's a solid room. But there's no doubt that it is led by Jalen Rayner.
You talked about Flowers. I'm pretty familiar with Crawford and his style of play. How is Flowers in comparison to Rayner's style?
I mean, it's a quarterback room of dual threat guys.
Okay.
That is even the I believe even the true freshman that they brought in that was an early enrollee. And I've just gone completely blank there. Let me double check my notes. But Tyrell Lewis brought in as an early enrollee, true freshman, and another dual threat guy. And that's really, I think, what A-State is going to lean towards moving forward. It helps things out certainly from a coordinator perspective. If you've got all guys with not identical but similar skill sets, you're not trying to game plan for a dual threat guy. You're not trying to game plan for a pocket passer. You've got kind of the same mold, even though they're not an identical mold.
And then I know you talked about the quarterback room as a whole, but can you talk about Jalen Rayner's play style in particular?
Jalen Rayner, I would classify as a pass first dual threat quarterback. He's got the wheels. He can certainly make things happen with his feet. And I think, in fact, actually, like my favorite play that he's had since he's been at Arkansas State was, a 60+ yard rushing touchdown. So he can make things happen with his feet, but they're going to have him pass it first. That is his biggest strength. And you look at Jalen Rayner and his style overall and what he's done, how he's looked at A-State. Certainly his arm is his best weapon. He's automatic in terms of the short passing game, which you would expect at this point in time after a couple of years. I did feel like, his touch, his freshman season on the deep ball was really great. And I'm not sure it was quite the same last year. I was actually kind of surprised by the fact that on some of his deeper passes, some of those completion percentages went down, although I do think he was maybe hindered a little bit by some receiver drops last season. But he's not afraid to air it out. Again, he's going to pass first, but don't get lulled into thinking that a play is dead, because as soon as you do, he can scramble, he can make something happen on the run.
Well, earlier I kind of talked about displaying the wow moments, and then there's some struggles, and you talked about that jump there from the freshman year to sophomore year. Do you think Rayner will take that step forward in his junior season here and kind of become more consistent?
I hope so. I think that the issue last year, the turnover numbers kind of crept up a little bit last year compared to his freshman season. And obviously there were teams out there, 1 year later, they've got a lot more tape on him. They know the tendencies, they know things like that. This is actually probably a stat that is going to be similar across the country when you look at quarterback turnovers and you look at interceptions. A-State was 5-0 last year when Jalen Rayner did not throw a turnover. They were 3-3, so a mixed bag when he threw one turnover. They were 0-2 when he had 2 picks. So again, I bet you could look at a lot of different teams across the country, and when the interception numbers look like that, the win-loss record probably looks similar. But that just shows you that just he has to perform well for this team to go out and have a win. And there were some times when he did that last season. There were also some times when he put that offense a little bit in harm's way by making a bad decision and throwing that interception. He did say this spring, when we got to talk to him after the spring game, that one of the things that he focused on and felt like he had taken a big step forward was just doing a better job with his pre-snap reads, being able to see what the defense was doing, evaluate it, and be ready to act before the ball was snapped, so that once the ball was snapped, he knew what he was looking at. He could make a quick decision and he could get that offense going quicker, going better, and just making a better decision there. So he said he had taken a step forward in that aspect. So certainly ready to see that play out this fall.
Well, moving over to the running game, the Red Wolves lose leading rusher Zach Wallace to graduation. He led them a year ago with 731 yards rushing, 11 touchdowns. They do return roughly 54% of their rushing production from 2024, highlighted by the return of Jacquez Cross and his 631 yards and 2 touchdowns. They also return promising youngsters Devin Spencer and Cedric Hawkins, and they bring in veteran Kenyon Clay over from Southern Miss. How did the running back room look in the spring?
I like this running back room a lot. I think throughout the spring, I don't know if there was, it was a real short list probably of guys that Butch Jones bragged on more than Jacquez Cross, which is great, because if he could be, he's not going to be necessarily the heavy hitting running back, the automatic short yard running back, but I think he could find more opportunities in some of the short yardage gains and excel there. One of the things that Jones was especially complimentary with Cross about, well, it was actually twofold. One was him taking a step forward with his leadership, surrounding himself with some of the other veteran leaders on the team, surrounding himself with guys like Jalen Rayner and Corey Rucker, and spending more time with guys like that. But then he also was very complimentary of the work that Jacquez Cross had done in the weight room, you know, taking more ownership of his body, making sure that everything was that he was going to be ready to go there. And by the way, not that this was a guy that was ever not in shape or not ready to go, but even taking that next step forward in terms of being physically prepared for the season ahead. So again, Jones raved about Cross. I like Kenyon Clay. I think Butch Jones told us when he signed that he was actually a faster version of Zach Wallace. And Zach Wallace had some sneaky speed. You know, he was usually the get 1 yard, get 2 yards guy. But if he found a hole, man, he was tough to bring down. But Kenyon Clay, a good addition there. Devin Spencer, certainly you think he'll take some kind of a jump just because he was a freshman last year and he was able to contribute. So he's got a year of college football under his belt now. What is that going to look like? And then with Cedric Hawkins, unfortunately, we didn't get to see him this spring. Last year, it was game 3 against Michigan, suffered a pretty significant knee injury, and he is not back yet. So hopefully that's a guy that will get back to 100% and will be able to, you know, start getting ready again in the summer with summer workouts, and then get a clean bill of health, hopefully, coming up this fall and be able to help out there.
You know, last season it was kind of a 1-2 punch there with Wallace and Cross. Do you expect it to kind of Clay to kind of step in that Wallace role and Clay and Cross kind of be that 1-2 punch in 2025?
I do. Again, I do wonder if Jacquez might get some of those additional opportunities, because it was towards the end of the season, it was kind of set. You know, if it was early in the down situation, you know, you see Cross out there. If it's anything under maybe even 2 yards, 3 yards, maybe even to go, then it's like it was automatically Wallace. I don't know if we'll definitely see that much of a designated split. Like, it's going to be this guy if it's this situation, it's going to be this guy if it's this situation. I think we might see Cross in more situations with more opportunities, because in addition to obviously what he can do with his feet in the run game, he's pretty good. He's turned into a decent pass catcher as well. So I just feel like there could be more opportunities for him there. But I do think Clay will get a lot of those short yardage, 3rd and 1, 3rd and goal situations. Certainly going to see a lot of him, it feels like.
All right. Who do you think gets that first carry on the season against Southeast Missouri State?
I do think it's going to be Jacquez Cross. That is my bold prediction for that one. I do think we will see at least 3 running backs in that game. But I think the very first guy out there on the field, the very first one that gets to, you know, receive that handoff from Jalen Rayner is going to be Cross.
Well, let's turn our attention over to the wide receiver room. This room is highlighted by the return of all Sun Belt second-team wide receiver Corey Rucker, who was targeted 125 times and turned that into 69 catches for 1,053 yards and 7 touchdowns. But this room did suffer some losses, losing 3 guys who accounted for 129 targets, 1,011 yards receiving, and 5 touchdowns in 2024. The trio of Jackson, Ely, and Jones all graduated. They bring in Nana Burris from FIU and JJ Harrell from Mississippi State. They also just got a commitment. Was it today? I guess peek behind the curtain. We're not live. So April 30th, commitment from 2023 FCS freshman All-American Jalen Benelli from Wagner. Is that correct?
That's what I'm seeing in front of me. I'm pulling up notes right now just to make sure I don't get anything wrong with Benelli, because this is information that happened earlier today. So I'm still learning about this young man as well.
Well, from the guys that were there this spring, how did the wide receiver room look?
I like this room, just like I do with the running backs as well. But I think where with the running backs, you have kind of established depth. It's a little bit different with the wide receivers, because you have such a veteran, established leader with Corey Rucker. He's so good. And I'm really interested to see what he's going to do with his senior season, how he's going to approach it, because you go back to last year, and with the year that he put together, he was able to take over the top spot all time in Arkansas State career receiving yards. So he's number 1 in that category. He's still got a handful of touchdowns to go to be number 1 in the receiving touchdowns category all time at Arkansas State. And then he's got a ways to go to be number 1 all time in catches. Like he's like 100 shy, which is a 100 reception season is a lot. But not necessarily out of the realm of possibility if you're talking about 12 regular season games, maybe a conference championship game, a bowl game. All of a sudden, those number of catches you got to get per game kind of drop a little bit. But he's great. He's the leader of that room. There's no doubt about it. I cannot tell you how many times this spring we saw Raynor to Rucker, and it just looked like Old Faithful, right? Like it was just easy peasy for those guys. I feel like their chemistry is so insane right now. Their camaraderie is so insane. I really do wonder if those guys have gotten to the point where they're like finishing each other's sentences or something like that. But obviously nobody gets it done with one. So you got to have some other guys step up. And you mentioned the incoming guys in the portal. I think that Hunter Summers can take a big step up this year. He was a guy that was called on a lot this spring. We saw Chauncey Cobb get into the mix a little bit this spring at slot as well. So there are some options. It's not going to just be all Corey Rucker, but it probably will be a decent amount of Corey Rucker.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, there's 129 targets that are vacant in 2024. Sounds like Rucker needs all those 129 targets. How do you see the targets getting divided up?
Yeah, look, he's going to be the number 1 option on a lot of different plays, because he is the guy that again, they've got that camaraderie worked out. That if you get it vaguely in Ruck's direction, he's going to be able to haul it in. So he is going to absorb some of those. But, I do think, as mentioned, Hunter Summers can take a big step up this year. He was a guy that played last year and got in the mix a little bit there in the receiving game, but he was a few receivers down the pecking order there. But I think that, with those catches that are up for grabs, he can step up big time. I do think Burris is going to have an opportunity there. Harrell is going to have an opportunity there. And then, maybe this new commitment that we mentioned just a few minutes ago, Jalen Benelli, with some opportunities to step up there as well. He did have 90 receptions for 1,359 yards, 9 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons, and was an FCS freshman All-American. A-State has had some good success with having some guys come up from the FCS level and really being able to contribute right away and doing some big things. So maybe Benelli is one of the guys that ends up absorbing some of those catches as well.
All right. If you were to describe how the tight ends are utilized in this offense as someone who's never caught an Arkansas State game, how would you describe it?
Inconsistent. And I don't necessarily mean in terms of their play on the field. It's not that from one game to another, you're seeing like a bad tight end performance or a great tight end performance. I just mean that in the years that Butch Jones has been at the helm, the way that the tight ends have been used has varied quite a bit depending on the personnel that is in the room. You go back to 2022, Arkansas State had a tight end by the name of Seydou Traore, who is now at Mississippi State. And he was the leader in receptions in 22. He was the leader in reception yards. He was the leader in touchdowns, or at least tied for the team lead. And that year, like 25%, or maybe not that many, like 20% of the receptions went to the tight ends. They were heavily involved in the mix again, and most of that was due to Traore. Over the past 2 years, Traore, by the way, basically is an oversized wide receiver. So he was he was there in the tight end room, but you didn't have quite anybody the past couple of years who had quite that same skill set. Tight ends still used quite a bit in the passing game. In fact, I think they accounted for about 15% of the catches this season. So it's not like a massive drop off going from 20% to 15%, but it is really dependent upon the personnel that is in the room. They are a part of the receiving game. Of course, there are going to be some times where you get into short yardage, you get into some goal line situations, and they'll put 2 tight ends out there instead of just 1. But again, it kind of depends on the dudes as to how that group is going to be used year in and year out. I would imagine the usage this year in 2025 is going to look similar to what we saw in 24.
Well, let's get to that personnel in the tight end room. They take a hit with Manny Stevenson Jr. graduating and Miller McCrumbie heading over to South Alabama. But they do return Tyler Little and bring in Tyler Fortenberry from Vanderbilt. How did that room look in the spring?
In terms of just groups, I don't know if there was a group that Butch Jones spoke more highly of this spring than the tight ends in terms of growth. We saw Tyler Fortenberry out there a lot. Tyler Little is good. He's been good. He's going to be a contributor. Now, because of the end of the spring, Tyler Little had a slight situation. He had a knee scope, I think. So he missed the final few practices. It was a very healthy spring overall for A-State, but he was sidelined for just a little bit, nothing significant, just cleaning up the knee. He's going to be good to go this summer. But because of that, we saw a lot of Jabari Bush on the field, and I thought he held his own and looked pretty good in a lot of those different moments. So this is a group where, you're going to see Little a lot. You're going to see Fortenberry a lot as the season comes along. But I think there might be some reps that Jabari Bush carved out for himself this spring that when he had the opportunity, he stepped up and took it.
Well, the offensive line loses 4 of 5 starters with left tackle Noah Smith as the only returner. They do return some of the 2024 depth with Jason Myers, Tristan Smith, Cameron Ambrose, and Riley McGeehee. From the portal, they bring in Will Saxon from Southern Miss. How did that group look? And what did you see in trying to figure out a line that could work this coming season?
Yeah, I don't know. And that's not the first time, by the way, that I'm going to say this while we go through this Q&A. And one of the reasons I say it like that is because A-State had McKeelan Thomas at right tackle for the first 2 weeks of practices. And then you get into those final 2 weeks, the portal opens, and he now has a new home at Virginia. So you have a situation throughout most of the spring where you kind of think you're set, at least in terms of guys you've already got there. No coach on the planet is ever going to tell you that they have enough depth in the trenches, but you kind of know at least what that spring rotation is going to look like. And then you get almost close to the home stretch and then it changes. So, we saw Alaric Watson there at right tackle. We saw Riley McGeehee, who was back up at left tackle last fall, move to right tackle a little bit and run with some of the twos there and get acclimated. So I think it's still just a little bit of a work in progress on that offensive line. I mean, that's a unit that has to be a hive mind, right? Like they have to think as one, they have to move as one. And I think they were still working on getting that chemistry completely together by the end of the spring. I do like Mason Myers at center. He kind of got pressed into service this time last year because last spring was when Jacob Bayer, who was the starting center, tore his ACL about midway through spring camp. Myers was kind of thrust into that situation, handled it well. Actually started the one game at the beginning of the season when Bayer had not been cleared to come back yet. And so he served as a backup behind Bayer, kind of set under the learning tree of Jacob Bayer for the rest of the season, and seemed like he picked up a lot, and I think he's ready to take that next step this spring. There is also, by the way, a new offensive line coach. So there are going to be things that are just slightly different. Nick Grimes last year was coaching the tight end room. Now he's in the offensive line room. He's a son of longtime veteran, well-known offensive line coach JB Grimes. So he's certainly ready to go there. He was the interim offensive line coach for the bowl game, and that unit performed very well there. But you got some dudes to replace big time that were on the line there in that bowl game, and a lot of starts, a lot of questions, I think, still on the line. And there is, by the way, I'm going to look at my phone a lot because I got to look at these commitments as we go along. But there is additional offensive lineman that's going to be joining the group, and that is Kobe Williams, who just committed a few days ago. He was at Memphis last year. He redshirted, and he was a consensus 3-star recruit coming out of high school, but he's going to be in that O-line room coming up this summer when summer workouts begin.
All right. If you have to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who would that be?
I feel like I need to redeem myself because I thought about my picks last year. They weren't good. But I hope I'm not going to jinx anybody. But I really do think that Hunter Summers can take a step here. I'm excited to see what he'll do. Again, one, it's about opportunity, right? You guys talked about the number of catches that are going to be up for grabs. And even though if you ask Corey Rucker, he'd probably tell you that he'd take all of them, that you'd be willing to throw his way. Clearly, you need more guys to step up there. And I think Summers is capable of doing that. And I'll speak it into existence. I think he will do that.
Well, there is a new DC here for the Red Wolves in 2025. Griff McFarley, while new to the role at DC, he's not new to Arkansas State. He served as the linebacking coach in 2024. Can you describe the defensive scheme that Coach McFarley plans to run there at Arkansas State?
Yeah, it's going to be a 4-2-5. So not completely reinventing the wheel from last year when Arkansas State had a 4 down front, but talking to some of these players this spring, they did say it was a little bit of a learning curve, a little bit to get used to, just based on the different level of detail they really had to get into to be able to pull off what McCarley wants to do on defense. Spring was, kind of a work in progress. I think the defense started to click a little bit there at the end. Once everybody kind of got more comfortable with the install and got more comfortable with what they were supposed to do in the communication, but it is going to be a little bit different. They're going to mix it up a little bit more in terms of pre-snap looks. But other than that, 4-2-5, we'll see how it looks when the fall comes together. I'm about to say I don't know a lot, by the way, when we get to the defensive preview.
Yeah, there's a lot. You'll hear us talk about a lot of production along that defense that's gone. So a lot of change. But let's move to the position rooms that we run the defense for Coach McCarley. And we'll start with the guys up front along the defensive line. This group, like the other defensive units, they lose a lot of production from 2024, either through graduation or the transfer portal. The biggest losses for this unit feels like on the interior, where 5 guys saw snaps at defensive tackle a year ago have moved on. But it's highlighted by the return of their top sack guy from a year ago in edge, Brian Whitehead II, and his 4 sacks. Via the portal, they added Cody Sigler from West Alabama, Simeon Mitchell from McNeese, Orlando Daniels from Albion, DeMarcus Hendricks from Texas A&M Kingsville, and recently Christopher Bodie from Liberty. For the guys that were there this spring, how did they look?
I think it was okay, but I think the defensive line is incomplete from what we saw. Again, I did say a moment ago that no coach on the planet is ever going to tell you that they feel like they have enough competitive depth in the trenches. And just like on the offensive line, that's true on the defensive side of the ball. But you got to the end of spring and there were like 5 bodies left standing at the interior of the defense. So with the spring game, you weren't even doing like 1s versus 1s, 2s versus 2s, because there just weren't enough guys to be able to do that. I do feel like, A-State has some really good production and some really good players coming back at defensive end. You mentioned Brian Whitehead. He had a great year last year. He can take another step forward. A-State returns Marcus Bradley, a defensive end, a guy who played in 11 games last year. He can take another step forward. And I'm really excited to see Ethan Hassler back. Ethan Hassler was a huge part of this defense at defensive end for a couple of years. And then last year he was sidelined. He suffered a knee injury, I want to say in fall camp. And they tried to get him back, got him back for like one game and got hurt again. And he was back this spring very sparingly. I saw him for, like blink and you miss it during the spring game, but he's back and he's going to be able to help a lot there at defensive end. So defensive end, there are some great guys to build around there to get that rotation where you want it. That's going to be good. The interior, I think you do have some questions again, just because one of the phrases that Butch Jones talks about a ton is competitive depth, right? So maybe you have depth, but is it competitive depth? Is it a lot of guys that can push to be your ones, that can push to be in that rotation? And I'm not sure if A-State is quite satisfied there with what they've got. You did have, in addition to some of the guys you mentioned at the interior, Lucas Banks was a guy that we saw that I don't know if he was, I know the roster was actually taken down offline, so it was a little hard to find for a little bit in terms of who was on the team and who was not. But Lucas Banks is a guy we saw a lot this spring at the interior that seemed like he had some good flashes in addition to some of those players that you named. But again, if I had to pick the starting defensive line for game one, I would honestly probably just like close my eyes and point to a name on the sheet of paper beside me and then just cross my fingers that maybe I got it right.
Well, we mentioned the recent addition of Christopher Bodie. He's a pretty nice get for the Wolves. He ranked 21st. We calculate havoc rate, which is sacks, pressures, stops on third and fourth downs, and he was like almost in the top 20 pretty consistently for the group of 5 last year among defensive tackles. So it feels like he should provide a big boost to this unit. What is the expectation surrounding him here in Jonesboro?
We didn't get to – Butch Jones played it very close to the vest in terms of any portal commitments. He did mention a couple of times that, before spring wrapped, so this would have been before April the 26th, that at that time A-State had 6 commitments and we're probably looking to get 8 or 9 more out of the portal. So we didn't get any kind of, coach insight on Bodie. But, I saw some of the numbers that you did. And of course I've looked at his numbers and, just the tackles overall, sacks, forced fumbles, and really seemed like he took a big step forward, last season. So being able to add not just a big body, but a big productive body and a veteran guy there on the defensive line is really huge, because what we're starting to see in the portal era now is you're starting to see these power teams go out and get group of 5 guys for depth. And it kind of stinks because, they're just throwing huge chunks of money out there. But now these guys have to decide, all right, do I want to be in a situation where I can play, or do I want to be in a situation where I'm going to ride the pine, but I'm going to get $500,000? That's a hell of a decision. And I'm not going to fault a player for going either way, but because of that, because all of a sudden you're starting to see this talent horde among the big brands, the high resource teams, it just does not leave a lot of competitive depth to go around in the trenches of the group of 5. So Bodie is a really good get for Arkansas State.
Who do you feel is the key cog in this room heading into 2025 for it to be successful?
I really don't know. And I'm sorry that I don't have more insight there for you about that. I am, as mentioned, really intrigued by Ethan Hassler, just because he's been around this program the longest. He is the veteran there. He signed with Arkansas State out of high school. And you certainly hope that he is going to be super motivated for his senior season. He's actually a guy, Ethan Hassler, after being sidelined pretty much all of last year, he went through senior day last year and then decided to come back. And so I'm hoping that he really, shows what he is capable of, which we know is a high level of performance there at defensive end, and shows, anybody who might have forgot about him last year that he is still absolutely a dude that needs to be reckoned with there on the line and can do some big things.
Well, like that defensive line, the linebacking group takes a hit in losing their top 4 linebackers in terms of tackles from 2024. The group leaves behind 152 tackles, or as they recorded all but 2 tackles from the linebacking group. That leaves Kyle Taylor and his 2 tackles as the top returner here in 2025. They do bring in some help in the form of former Red Wolf Javonte Mackey coming back from Memphis. You got Wyatt Wright coming in from NC State and Aaron Alexander coming in from Michigan State. Oh, what should we make of this linebacking group heading into 2025?
That's a good question. And this is another part where I'm just going to say, I don't know a lot because you've got obviously the statistical departure. You've got the talent departure that you guys just mentioned. But then you've also just got a massive leadership void left by the guys that departed. One of the starters there last year, Justin Parks, who, spent time at safety before he moved to linebacker last year, had been like a 4-year team captain. You had Char Willikis, who had been there for several years, was very established there in that linebacker room. You had Marvin Ham, who was just a 1-year transfer, but he came from Colorado. He was a great addition. And then when you look at some of the other guys that departed in that room, you had Dane Motley, who had actually been at Arkansas State longer than the coaching staff as he was playing in his 6th year. So it is such a statistical departure in that room. It is such a leadership departure in that room that it's really hard to wrap your head around what is going to happen next. Yes, we saw several of those players that you mentioned on the field this spring, and saw several guys out there a lot that certainly played well. Kyle Taylor, Chris Pearson, some of the guys that returned and stepped up a little bit this spring. Saw a newcomer in Nigel Nelson as an early enrollee freshman that we heard this coaching staff talk about a little bit. But you look at the portal, and there's a lot of incoming players that it looks like are going to be here in the linebacker room in summer and in fall. And so to try and figure out where they're going to fit into the mix, your guess is as good as mine.
Well, Javonte Mackey was a freshman All-American for Arkansas State, but he missed the 2024 season at Memphis due to injury. Is there any insight to his health and status for the 2025 season?
I still follow him on Twitter. So his injury was an ACL, which certainly you don't want to see anybody injured, but ACLs are so common right now that, any orthopedist, usually they just get those guys fixed back up, and sometime between 8 months and a year, typically they're back out there and ready to go. And I can't remember when I saw it scroll by on Mackey's timeline, but I do believe I did see a tweet from him saying that he is, 100% cleared. He's ready to go. He'll be back in action. So I don't think there's any concern there about him being able to be healthy and come back and contribute. And I like the Mackey pickup for A-State for a couple of reasons. One, he's a really talented dude. He was, again, you mentioned it, he was a freshman All-American. He was a big time contributor the year before last. But 2, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world right now to have a player or 2 in a locker room that has a grass isn't always greener story. That they can tell some of the younger guys. Now, does that necessarily impact the younger guys? Maybe, maybe not, because nobody thinks it could happen to them, right? Like they think if they might not think their storyline would play out like Mackey's, but you've already got one guy in that locker room in Corey Rucker, who of course spent a year at South Carolina and very quickly wanted to return to Jonesboro. And now Mackey, goes to Memphis for a year and is now coming back. So again, a couple of grass is not always greener stories are not bad to have around.
Well, what's your approach here? Who do you think the 2 starters are? You got 2 hands over your eyes and picking with your elbow, or do you have an idea who these 2 starters might be here heading into snap 1 versus Southeast Missouri State?
I'll take Mackey. So there's that, but there's one. But I will tell you this, that, in addition to Mackey, when you look at some of the portal commitments and when you look at the guys that On3 has listed, which I've looked at their social and I haven't seen it reported anywhere else, but they have 2 additional FBS transfer linebackers that are committed to A-State. Nolan Asbury, who is from Alabama, has committed to A-State. So that's 4 portal linebackers right there. So, that tells you 2. One is Mackey. But if they're still going out and they are hitting that position that hard in the portal, then that tells you the coaching staff they still need more talent. They still need more dudes there. So I'm taking Mackey, and we'll figure out the other starting linebacker when the season kicks off on August 30th.
Well, moving over to the defensive backfield, like the rest of the defense, it also suffered some big losses as well, losing their top 3 safeties and top 5 corners from 2024. The top returner looks to be corner James Reed III and safety Brandon Grill. But they did hit the portal hard, bringing in 3 at corner and 3 at safety to bolster that room. What should we expect from this defensive backfield in 2025?
That is, once again, an excellent question. And once again, I'm going to say, I don't know. There's just so much new with this A-State defense. You know, every single room has a different position group, different position coach. Every single room has vastly different players in it than the year before. And, you know, everything is going to be done under a slightly different scheme with Griff McCarley at the helm at defensive coordinator. I do like the back end. I'm excited about the return of James Reed III. And we saw him a little bit more at safety last year before he got hurt. And he went down with an Achilles tear was his injury. And he was really making some jumps there, both contributing in the secondary and then also on special teams as well before he got hurt. So certainly with an Achilles, you know, a little bit maybe more concerning in terms of recovery as opposed to an ACL. But there were some small cases where they got him out on the field this spring. Looks like he is trending in a very good direction and is going to be able to contribute this fall. Brandon Barnes at safety is a player that Butch Jones talked up a lot this spring. In fact, he was one of the guys that Butch sent out following the spring game to do media Q&A. And that's a role that is reserved for team leaders, right? And that was not something that was our first time speaking with Brandon Barnes. So that's not a role that he's been in before. However, they feel like he is ready to take that next step, both on and off the field, to be able to contribute there. Some of the other guys that have stepped up or that caught everybody's attention, I think, in the spring. You know, you mentioned Brandon Greil. I feel like I heard Avante Dickerson's name called a lot this spring, and he is a transfer portal guy. Been at Utah State, been at Oregon. And by the way, Butch Jones at practice is hilarious because he's got a megaphone and you can tell exactly who is having a good day and who is having a bad day. I do feel like we heard more of Dickerson having a good day. So that's a positive there, but you've got some good transfers, and then A.G. McGee as well. I would expect to contribute just a lot. I think I got somewhere off track a little bit with this question, so I apologize. I was just trying to name names I do know, since so many of my answers about defense have been, I don't know. So
you did great.
If you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season here in 2025, who would that be?
I don't know if he technically classifies as I think with the word breakout, I have a tendency to think about guys who maybe haven't contributed a ton in the past, but I'm going to tell you who I think needs to be the force in the secondary, and I think that's A.G. McGee, who is a transfer from Marshall. He brings you 2 really important things, in addition to, of course, his talent on the field and his ability to make plays. He's a veteran, and he knows what it takes to compete and to win at the highest level of Sun Belt competition, coming off a team that won a Sun Belt title last year. So I don't know if he'll necessarily be the breakout guy. I do feel like he is one of the most important guys this year on the defense for a few different reasons. And, you know, trying to make sure that secondary is in good shape, trying to make sure that these younger players have some guidance and some leadership. Those are all going to be really important things there, because look, big picture, this defense has to be significantly better than it was last year. It wasn't good last year. There's not any way you can look at it statistically, analytically, and say that it was a good defense. It was a defense that at times had good flashes, but it was not a good defense. And there needs to be a big jump across the board, all position groups in 2025.
Let's move over to the special teams. And how is that unit looking in the spring? And are there any concerns?
We'll do concerns first. I don't think this team has identified its punter yet. And that's always a little bit of a concern. Ryan Hiker had a great year last year. He was just a one-year guy, and now he has got a rookie minicamp invite with the Colts. So good for him. That's awesome. And A-State has had a really good stretch of punters as of late, but I don't know if that punter was necessarily identified again in spring. They have picked up a punter commitment already in the portal over the past week or so. Jackson Waller is a punter commitment. And he was rated as a 5-star punter, 4-star kicker coming out of high school. He redshirted his freshman season at SMU. So they're still trying to go out and get that role filled. Everywhere else on special teams, though, I'm feeling like this team is going to be pretty good. They returned Clune Van Andel to handle field goals, which is great. He started just a tiny bit shaky last year and then went through a stretch where he made like 18 or 19 in a row. Did not miss a kick from game 3 until game 13, the bowl game. That was the next time he missed a field goal. So very steady there. Clayton Amaya handles kickoffs, very steady there. Jaquez Cross is going to be back to do kickoff returns. He's awesome, very explosive. He can do some big things. And then I'm really excited this year because Jaquez Cross is going to be the first guy that probably gets the opportunity to do punt return. And that's really exciting. Again, go back to what I was saying earlier about Jones bragging so much on Cross this spring and what he's done. And I think he's looking forward to this opportunity. And I think he's going to do big things. The only concern with the return game is just how quick in the season will teams stop kicking it to Cross on kickoff, because it'll probably happen pretty quick because you just don't want that guy to beat you. And he absolutely has the capability to do so on kickoff return.
Well, now that the spring practice is over, which position group or groups do you think is the most concerning heading into the 2025 season?
I think probably I think it's probably in the trenches, just because I still feel like there's some unknown there. You know, on the O-line, again, you had the late departure there at right tackle. So I'm not sure if that is shored up. On the defensive line, again, they're still going to add there at the interior. So I'm not sure if anything is established there. And you kind of need another defensive end to emerge. And then also I'll throw in linebackers as well. And again, that's the unknown. That's the fact that they're still going out and getting guys out of the portal. So all of those are it's not even necessarily a concern like, oh, this group is going to be bad. It's just a concern of, oh, what is this group? What are these groups going to look like? And I don't think we know the answer to that yet. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that there are probably a lot of programs in college football that are kind of like that right now, where you've got one or two groups where you just don't know because you lost a lot of dudes, either graduation or the portal or both. And you don't necessarily know 100% who's going to be on campus in June. And then, of course, again, when fall camp begins in August, to start filling in on those roles.
In today's age of NIL, revenue sharing, and the transfer portal, how has it changed Arkansas State's recruiting philosophy?
Jones still goes fairly heavy in terms of high school commits. I had the commitment list somewhere among the 800 sheets of paper I've printed out. And when you go and look, you know, the 2025 recruiting class was 25 players. And again, a lot of high school players with a couple of dashes of junior college transfers. So they're still trying to build the roster via the high school ranks. And when you look at the contributors this year, when you look at Jalen Rayner, that was a guy that signed at A-State out of high school. Corey Rucker, a guy that signed at A-State out of high school. Devin Spencer, of course, who's going to be there in that running back rotation. He's out of high school. And there are several guys, a few guys on the defense that I could name as well. So that's still how they want to build. But you're foolish if you don't get the portal up heavy and address needs there. So that's what they've done. It has been interesting that, you know, it does feel like it's a staff that leaves no stone unturned. They've brought in, over the past few years, a handful of D2 guys. They've looked really heavily at FCS and have had some really good success there. But then, of course, they've taken some guys from big brand schools that maybe didn't get the reps there that they wanted and are now at the Group of 5 level. So they look all over the place. They recruit all levels and still want to build via high school, but a lot of portal guys on this roster as well.
So kind of a follow-up there with the high school with how the landscape of college football has changed. Do you notice the kind of the star rating or like getting high school players that maybe they wouldn't have got in previous years because Power 5 or Power 4 schools are taking transfers and experience from other schools, that it kind of leaves more for A-State?
I don't know. I look at the class rankings because I think everybody does that covers college athletics, but stuff like that at this point in time tends to go for me in one ear and out the other, because it seems like right now everything is like here for a good time, not a long time. So you look at those ratings and you look at those names, and I don't know how much I look at them, because how many are going to be here in 2 years, right? That's just the reality of the situation now. So there have been a couple of guys that you see that you feel like, all right, this guy is a good get, but would A-State have gotten him a couple of years ago? I honestly don't know. I just really don't, because you go back a couple of years or before the portal was a thing, and it wasn't necessarily, getting Division I transfers, but then, teams would load up on like JUCO guys or things like that. So it's always a little bit different. I'm sure there's some guys that A-State has gotten recently that maybe they wouldn't have gotten 5 years ago, but I don't think it is like an insane number. I don't think.
And when we're talking about the portal, how do you think and how do you feel Arkansas State has been doing in navigating the portal?
I mean, I feel like they've done a solid job. You look back over the past few years, and while I mentioned, some guys that they signed out of high school, you've also got some really big additions that are portal guys. I mean, you look at a lot of that running back room, or at least you look at Jaquez Cross, who we mentioned numerous times today. That's a portal guy. Hunter Summers, who is my breakout pick for the offense, that's a portal guy. A lot of the defense, they're going to be portal guys, because you don't have time to wait for a dozen high schoolers to mature to replace an entire defense that departed via graduation. So they've had to hit the portal hard. They have hit the portal hard. They've been able to find some really good key contributors there that have came to A-State and then, spent the rest of their careers at A-State and then moved on to what was next in their personal and professional lives.
Well, what do you think the main strength of this 2025 team is?
I think it has to be the offense. I think it really needs to be Jalen Rayner. I think this needs to be just a huge year for him. I think that there is going to be talent with the defense. I do think as they are still, as we mentioned with the portal players and the defensive line and the linebacker, I still think that the defense is going to be coming together this fall. So that offense has to start out red hot, because it might need to carry the defense for a couple of games while they get things together, while they work on that chemistry and that communication and make sure they have those details all ironed out. So I certainly think the offense is capable of that. I think Jalen Rayner is capable of taking another huge step this year, which he doesn't necessarily have to take a huge step. He's just got to do a couple of things better and cut down on those turnover numbers. So I think it can be the offense led by that quarterback position, with some good help from the running back room and some good help from those receivers and tight ends. But it has to be the offense early. They've really got to be ready to come out of the gate firing from day one.
What does success look like for the Red Wolves in 2025?
I think you just always want to continue to get better, right? And whether that is win total, which is part of it, or whether that is just making sure you were in the hunt for a Sun Belt championship until the final day of the regular season. Every year, the Butch Jones era, this team has saw its win total increase, 1, 2, 6, 8. So fans always want improvement. Fans are going to want to see 9 wins. Fans are going to want to see 10 wins, even if that might be tough with a completely revamped defense. And then one of the things that I want to see is with this being year 5 now, this team, I don't know if I want to say, oh, if they don't get to the Sun Belt Championship, I'm going to be mad. But it needs to be week 12, and Arkansas State still needs to be in the conversation. You've got to be at close to the top of the West, and in contention until the final day of the end of the year, because again, growth is important. It's important to take steps forward. So that's what I would like to see anyways.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but is there anything else you want to share or think that we should know about this 2025 Arkansas State Red Wolves football team?
No, it seems like as we were going on, every segment where we got done and moved to another one, I was like, oh, I should have mentioned this guy. Oh, I should have mentioned this guy. And then of course now like that ship has sailed. So I don't necessarily think there's anything, significant that I left out. Apologies to any players that I didn't mention. There were some great performances at the spring game that I left out. Shout out Cameron Thomas, who did some really good things in the run game. He rushed for almost 100 yards. DeMarco Blanton had a TD. There were some guys that were able to do some big things defensively. But I do think that we've covered most of it. I think this team is going to be really strong offensively. I think this team is going to be really strong special teams wise. And I think this team defensively is going to be something we all learn about this fall.
Well, Kara, thank you for taking some time out of your day to spend with us and share your knowledge of A-State. We greatly appreciate it.
I appreciate the invite again, guys. So thank you so much. You're doing a great job, by the way, with all of these. And it's awesome to have more and more people shining a spotlight on the group of five. It's really important. So keep crushing it. And thank you again.
Well, thank you for the kind words. We definitely appreciate it. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.